"Sorry, sir. We're really looking for someone a bit more agile," the manager said, barely concealing the dismissive smirk curling on his lips. 71-year-old Frank Dalton stood there quietly, a crisp resume in his calloused hand, the same hand that had once pulled fellow soldiers from burning wreckage under enemy fire. He didn't flinch when the manager turned his back, offering no handshake, no decency. A teenage employee at the register muttered under his breath, "Maybe he thinks this is the History Museum." 40 minutes later, tires screeched outside the storefront. A sleek black SUV bearing federal plates came to a sharp halt. Out stepped a 3-star general, scanning the scene with calm urgency. His voice was steady but firm. "Where is Master Sergeant Frank Dalton? If you believe wisdom isn't something that expires, type respect in the comments." Frank Dalton had served 33 years in the U.S. Army, a command master sergeant whose name quietly echoed through military halls. His uniform had once been heavy with honors, ones most civilians wouldn't recognize unless they visited a museum. After retiring, he lived modestly in a 1-story home on the outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina. He wasn't chasing praise, nor money. He just wanted purpose. 3 times a week, Frank showed up at the local VFW hall, helping repair old equipment. For veterans on fixed incomes and mentoring teens headed down dangerous paths. No cameras, no spotlight, just a man living by the same code that once guided him through war zones. On a cool October morning, Frank walked into Martin's Home Supply, a hardware store in town, holding a neatly printed resume. His boots, though worn, were polished, not out of pride, out of habit. The way a soldier preps before showing up to post. He didn't want handouts. He wasn't desperate for money. He just couldn't stomach another day with no direction. The silence in his home had become heavier than any combat pack he ever wore. Inside, young employees tossed curious glances his way. "Is this guy lost?" one of them whispered. "I think the senior center's 2 blocks over." The store's manager, probably not older than 32, sporting designer frames and perfectly styled hair, barely skimmed Frank's resume before offering a tired sigh. "Look," he said, folding the paper in half without permission. "We need people who can keep up, quick on their feet, tech-savvy, you know?" Frank didn't argue. "I may not move like I used to," he replied, his voice quiet but grounded. "But I show up. Haven't missed a day of duty in over 4 decades. The manager exchanged a smirk with another employee and shrugged. "Yeah, well, this isn't basic training. We're not hiring museum exhibits." In the back of the store, 2 employees faked interest in a shelf display while chuckling loud enough to sting. "Maybe he brought his medals thinking we take them as payment," one of them said. Frank didn't blink. The same calm face that once led men through smoke-filled chaos stared back at this new kind of battlefield. Ignorance. He folded his resume in half with a precision born from years of military order, tucked it into his jacket, and walked out with squared shoulders and a spine straight as ever. As he exited, the door's bell rang with artificial cheer, a cruel contrast to the dismissal that had just taken place. Across the street, Frank entered a small diner named Lila's. He always sat in the same booth, just past the jukebox. The chipped white mug was still warm in his hands when Lila, the owner and waitress of 30 years, noticed the resume beside. "His coffee. No luck, huh?" she asked, topping off his cup. Frank shook his head. "Said I'm too slow." He didn't sound bitter, just tired. Lila frowned, her jaw tightening. "Those kids don't know who the hell they're talking to. Couldn't spot gold if you handed it to 'em polished." Back at the store, jokes continued. "Those shoes looked like they stormed Normandy." Someone laughed. "Bet he thinks Wi-Fi is a secret code." One employee, however, wasn't laughing. His name was Tyler, a National Guard reservist, barely a year into his service. He stood by the register, eyes fixed on the door Frank had exited through. His gut turned with unease. Quietly, he picked up his phone, typed "Frank Dalton Master Sergeant" into Google. Within seconds, headlines appeared. "Hero of Black Ridge Rescue receives Silver Star. Veteran who saved 52 in Iraq. Retires after 33 years. Dalton's leadership credited with preventing civilian casualties during Operation Liberty Watch." Tyler's face paled. He took screenshots and posted them to a veteran appreciation group online with the caption, "This legend just applied at my store, and my boss laughed him out. What are we becoming?" The post spread like wildfire. Veterans and civilians alike flooded the comments. "Unbelievable. That's Frank Dalton. The man's a walking chapter of history." One of those who saw the post was Lieutenant General Alan Grayson, now stationed at the Pentagon. He'd served 2 tours with Dalton and didn't waste time. No public comment, No social media outrage, just one phone call. Short, cold, and with purpose. Meanwhile, back in the booth, Frank folded his napkin and left a 30% tip. He didn't know that within minutes, Main Street would become ground zero for a very different kind of operation. Outside, the calm of Main Street shattered as a black SUV cut across the pavement with a sharp stop. Its presence alone sent pedestrians pausing mid-stride. The vehicle didn't just roll in, it arrived with authority. The door opened, and out stepped Lieutenant General Alan Grayson, a living symbol of military order. His 3 stars glinted beneath the afternoon sun. His uniform pressed with the care of someone who treats discipline like oxygen. He wasn't here to buy a hammer. He was here to send a message. The second he entered Martin's home supply, the usual background noise of light rock and shelf-clattering chatter fell silent. Conversations halted. Customers froze. Employees stood wide-eyed as the general moved with a deliberate pace toward the counter. "Who?" he began, voice low but firm enough to reach the back wall. "Told Master Sergeant Frank Dalton he wasn't qualified to work here." The air in the room seemed to thicken. Lights didn't flicker, but somehow the atmosphere dimmed. The young manager, visibly shaken, stepped forward, suddenly aware of how small the room had become. I didn't know who he was, sir," he stammered. "We just needed someone faster." "You didn't know," the general echoed, the words slow and razor-sharp. "Because you didn't ask. Because you never looked beyond your assumptions. That man," he paused, scanning the store, locking eyes with every employee, "once dragged me 3 miles through hostile territory after our convoy was hit. Then he went back, twice, under fire, to pull out 2 more men. While most people panic in traffic, he was navigating landmines. He took 1 step forward. Frank Dalton has led over 200 soldiers through war zones with a steadiness you can't teach. He's saved more lives than you'll ever shake hands with. And you mocked him." All eyes were now on the manager, whose face had drained of color. Somewhere in the back, Tyler stood silently at attention. General Grayson turned his gaze to him and gave a single nod. "Specialist, thank you for having the integrity to do what your superiors did not, to recognize greatness when it stood right in front of you." Without another word, Grayson turned and walked out. The silence that followed was deafening, not just from shame, but from realization. Across the street, inside Lila's diner, Frank had just finished his 2nd cup of coffee. The door opened, and the general entered like it was 2006 again, stepping into the briefing tent before a mission. He made a beeline for Frank's booth and sat across from him. "You still know how to slip out of places without raising a fuss," Grayson said, cracking a smile. Frank looked up, surprise flickering briefly in his eyes. "Didn't expect you to show up for me, sir." "You showed up for me for 15 years, Dalton. Carried more weight than most ever could. It's my turn now." He slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were official documents. A federal job offer to lead a national mentorship program for veterans transitioning back to civilian life. Full salary, full benefits, and the one thing Frank wanted more than anything else, a purpose that mattered. Frank opened the folder, his weathered fingers tracing the page. "I didn't ask for this," he said, voice quieter now. "That's why you deserve it," Grayson replied. "The best never ask." By that evening, the story had spread like lightning. News outlets picked it up. Veteran groups across the country shared the moment. Headlines read, "War hero denied job. Pentagon steps in." Comments poured in. "That's how you honor service. And experience over ego, every time." Martin's home supply issued a public apology the next morning. The manager, sensing the irreversible damage to his credibility, resigned to pursue other opportunities. No one was surprised. 6 weeks later, Frank stood in front of a room full of fresh recruits at the opening ceremony of the National Veteran Leadership Academy in St. Louis. He looked out over 150 young faces, men and women wearing the same uncertain mix of pride and fear he remembered from his first days in uniform. "They told me I was too slow," he began, voice calm, but firm. "But I don't move fast anymore. I move with purpose. Speed without direction is wasted energy." The entire room rose in applause, not because he'd said something catchy, but because they understood the weight behind his words. They weren't clapping for a speech. They were clapping for a man who'd lived every word of it. Under Frank's leadership, The academy didn't just train veterans, it transformed the national conversation about what service meant. It taught corporations, institutions, and government departments to hire for resilience, wisdom, and strength of character, not just for speed or digital literacy. Frank never returned to that hardware store. He didn't need to. His impact reached far beyond a part-time position. He found something much bigger than a job, a mission. And now, every new recruit who walks through the glass doors of the Leadership Academy is greeted by the same quote etched in bold letters above the entrance. This place runs on experience. Move with it, or step aside. If you've ever been told your time has passed, just remember. Sometimes the world needs to slow down long enough to catch up with people like Frank Dalton. Subscribe to Her Feeling Stories if you believe. Time only strengthens true leaders.